Happy Pride! I'm Reverend Elith Liddell, a leader of the Gathering Cardiff and Pride Cymru's Faith Tent, and I want to welcome you to the Faith Tent Hour as a part of Pride Cymru's big online week. We are celebrating being LGBTQI people of faith. Pride is two-pronged. We celebrate together the dignity, equality and visibility of us, LGBTQI people of faith, and we protest that there are churches, mosques, synagogues and other religious communities who do not accept us. So you will find within this hour a celebration of who we are, loved and valued by God, and a protest, a challenge to those religious people who cannot accept us as we are, even though we believe that God does. We have for you a faith panel which expresses something of this challenge as it brings together LGBTQI representatives of faith, Jewish, Muslim and Christian, chaired by Crash Wigley, as they share their experiences. The gathering will be sharing some songs celebrating God's love for us, and I'll be sharing a reflection on what it means to embrace the colours of the rainbow in our lives. But now, we start with a prayer for Pride from the Diocese of Llandaff and a message of support from Bishop June, the Bishop of Llandaff.
Hello, I'm Bishop June, the Bishop of Llandaff, and this message is for those of you involved with Pride, particularly for those of you who would be running the faith tent or popped in to see what goes on there. I'm a very great believer in the importance of Pride. It's a wonderful part of our summer schedule. I once blessed the first Pride March in a town where I previously lived. And I did that because I think that the message of Pride is so important. It is a symbol to us of how our society is absolutely dependent on healthy diversity. Now, the faith tent reminds us all how radical that message is. Not all worldviews hold to the equality of human life. But I believe that every human being is equal and deserves the sense of value and dignity. No ifs, no buts. Our society is only as good as it can be if it's inclusive. Now, from my own faith tradition, the Christian tradition, we have always championed the values of equality and diversity. We haven't always lived by them, but they've been right there in the heart of what the Christian faith speaks about, which is that God values everybody equally. Now, this year Pride is very different, isn't it? There will be no jamborees, no massed crowds, and yet it still has presence for us. And I want to say to those of you who are involved with Pride this year, remember that faith matters. Faith that is worth believing in and giving your loyalty to stands for exactly what Pride stands for, the challenge of equality. So God bless you, and may you celebrate in these very strange times. May you celebrate the dignity and pride of being you.
Hi, we're The Gathering, a church for LGBTQ plus people and their allies.
At The Gathering, we create a safe space for all people to explore the Christian faith.
We love people of every sexuality, gender identity, all faith.
The Gathering for me is just the most incredible community of affirmation, love and hope. It really is what the 21st century church can and should be.
The Gathering is like a family to me, not because it's a gay church, but I know I can go to other members about LGBT issues without judgment.
The Gathering to me is my friends, a family and a home.
You can be yourself, just exactly who you are, unapologetically. But you can be known and loved.
It's just full of people that are able to come just as they are and be real.
What does the Gathering mean to me? Community, friendship, an open and inclusive space to worship God together.
Even when there are disagreements, there's always respect and compassion and love amongst each other.
I've never met people who are so kind, caring, and genuinely open about themselves.
It's like family to me. It's open-minded and inclusive.
Another thing that I really like about the Gathering is that we go to the pub every Sunday.
It's an incredible feeling being part of that group.
Alongside our own safe space, we're passionate about encouraging other churches in South Wales
to think about how they can be more welcoming of the LGBTQ+ community.
We're currently working towards our first LGBTQ inclusive conference to equip churches to be more LGBT friendly.
We wish everyone involved this year a happy Pride.
Have fun, be safe, we love you.
Okay, B'nawn da, and good afternoon and welcome. I hope you're all having a weekend that is full of pride as we mark the season virtually this year. This afternoon's talk has been put on as part of the Faith Tent Hour, which has been organised jointly by the Church in Wales and The Gathering, which many of you will be familiar with as a church set up as an inclusive church in Cardiff by and for LGBT+ people and our allies. My name is Crash, and I'll be chairing the discussion this afternoon. I'm a law student at Cardiff University and a former leader at The Gathering. And before returning to study, I was an officer at Stonewall Cymru, the LGBT rights charity. And I'm also a director at the Cardiff Trans Singers, which is a choir for trans people. The title of the Faith Tent this year is Be Yourself. And with this in mind, it gives me great pleasure to be chairing this discussion with LGBT people from a range of different faith backgrounds about religion, being LGBT, community, identity, and hopefully to challenge some of the myths and stereotypes that can exist in this area. So I'll begin by introducing our panelists. So joining me today, we have Osman. Osman is the Community Outreach Officer for Hidayah, which is an award-winning organisation which provides support and welfare for LGBTQI+ Muslims and works to promote education to challenge discrimination, prejudice and injustice. Joining us is also Ruth James. Ruth James is a bisexual Christian. She used to be a lawyer, but is now halfway through training for ministry in the Church in Wales. And she's also a member of The Gathering. She lives here in South Wales, where she splits her time between college in Cardiff, church in Caerphilly, and her home in the Monmouth Diocese. And then finally, the third member of our panel is Gil Rubin. Now, Gil is a 22-year-old Jewish man who identifies as bisexual. He was born in Israel and grew up in Dorset, where he lives now. Gil graduated from the University of Cambridge this July with a degree in politics and international relations. And he's the sabbatical officer at the Union for Jewish Students with a focus on interfaith, social action and Israel trips. In October, he'll be studying for his master's degree in modern Middle Eastern studies. So welcome everybody, Croeso, and welcome to virtual Wales for some of you. I thought to start off this discussion, and especially thinking about how the theme for this event is Be Yourself at the Faith Tent. One of the attitudes that I've come across being involved in LGBT activism and in faith communities is this idea that you cannot be both LGBT yourself and religious. So you have to be one or the other, and you have to effectively choose between these different parts of your identity. So to kick things off, I was interested if anyone had also come across that kind of attitude, and if so, how do you react to it, or how do you interpret that kind of idea? So very kindly, Osman's offered to start the discussion. So over to you, Osman.
Thanks, Crash. So I'd like to say that, for me, religion is a very sacred and personal thing. My God knows my heart, my intentions. And for me, I think it's important to remind people that a little more love and a little less judgment would make the world a better place. That's how I would see it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. What about the others? Is this something that you've come across, Ruth, maybe?
Yeah, it definitely is, sadly, something that I've come across. And I tend to quite firmly respond that actually my identity isn't a matter for discussion. You can disagree with me as much as you like, and people do, but you don't get to tell me that I'm not who I am. And I am bisexual and I am a Christian. So it's not a matter for discussion whether I am the person that I know myself to be. I am the person that God made me to be, and I believe wholeheartedly that that is both a Christian and a bisexual woman, and therefore it's just not a matter for discussion as far as I'm concerned whether you agree that I am who I am. If someone wants to talk about opinions with me, I'm actually quite robust. I'm quite happy to have a fairly robust discussion about that with people, but who I am is not on the table.
For sure, I definitely want to echo what Ruth said. And also, I think that this idea comes from ignorance. It comes from people not knowing people who identify as either category or identify as both categories. And yeah, it comes from this caricature of thing that other people see the other camp to be. And once you meet people who have to fit into both categories, you realize that this is a very possible thing to do, to carve out a space where you can be both faithful and LGBT. I really think once people meet people from the other camp, it's very easy to get over those barriers, to get over that idea.
And I think, going back to what you just said, Ruth, I think this idea of people being able to know, to be trusted to know who they are and to decide that for themselves, and this idea of this being such a personal aspect of our identity, I think that's something that a lot of LGBT people, whether they're religious or not, will probably recognize, because lots of people, when they come out, whether they come out as gay or as bi or as trans or as lesbian, face that reaction of, well, no, you're not. Well, how could you possibly know what goes on the inside of someone else's mind? And then I think there's an interesting parallel there with also people who want to dictate other people's faith or other people's religion or other people's relationship with God. When in a way it comes down to a similar thing, like, how can you presume to know so much about somebody else?
It's like Osman was saying about judgment, I think, is that actually if we listen to one another and believe one another when they tell us who they are, then we don't have to sit in a place of judgment. We just have to sit in a place of believing the people who are telling us what it is to be them, to be themselves.
Well, thanks for that little discussion. And I think related to this idea, and especially the point that you reminded that Osman made around kind of the lack of understanding and the importance of that kind of open-mindedness. If there was something, now there are two halves to this question, but let's start with the first half. So if there was something you wish your faith community understood better about what it is to be LGBT, what would it be? And then later, perhaps we can move on to thinking about, well, what would we hope our LGBT communities understood better about people of faith? But let's start off with what we hope our faith communities could hopefully understand a bit better.
I would just kind of like to mention that, for me, I would like to tell the Muslim community that, being LGBTQI plus is not a lifestyle choice. It's who we are as a person. Sadly, for people like myself, I'm not out to my family. My parents and people in my community seem to think it's something that growing up in the West has influeed me. But it's not, it's who I have been, and I've known that I was gay since I was 8 years old. I also want to tell the Muslim community that we have the same dreams and aspirations. We want families of our own. We want to lead halal lives like everyone else. Many of us have had our religion used against us as a weapon, but it doesn't mean that Allah doesn't like us. It's who we are as a person. You can both be LGBTQI plus and religious. You don't have to pick. And if you believe your God is perfect and does not make mistakes, then you are as you are, and you're meant to be who you are, and you just have to embrace it. And I think it's important in terms of speaking to other Muslim people, what I say to them is that Islamic law and Islamic history tells a different story. Islamic law isn't stagnant in 7th century Arabia. No, Islamic law has been changed and can be changed.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Osman. I think that's a really, really powerful and important message. And what about the others? Or Gil, maybe you want to go next?
For sure. I think that the question is worded really well in terms of talking about community, and that's something that I would like my faith community to understand about being LGBT. It's about finding community of people who identify in the same way as you, and who have the same life experiences as you. But another thing I'd like to also go back to what Osman was saying about aspirations. Like, I think I would really like my faith community to understand that LGBT people come in a variety of spectrums, with a variety of ways, and have a variety of aspirations, whether that be like with family, with career, with wanting to build a life with kind of the similar with the same building blocks, I guess, as faith, as like supposedly normal families would like to as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that is definitely something that I recognise based on what you said before, Osman, as well, is this this frustration with people who hold on to very old-fashioned or historic religious interpretations as a reason to deny people respect or equality, and often that's not done in a particularly knowledgeable way, even. But Ruth, I don't know if that's something that you can perhaps relate to as well.
Yeah, very much. And I think, Osman stole my thunder. What I've got in my notes here is being LGBT isn't something you do, it's something you are. And for me, that's a really big thing, is that if people want to talk about the actions that I take, that's one thing, but they need to understand that sitting alone in this room doesn't stop me being bisexual. The fact that there are no other people here doesn't mean that my sexuality goes away. It's not like I go on to standby when I'm not in a relationship, and it's not that my relationships define my sexuality. So I think there's something really important about recognizing that this isn't, a lot of the time, the rules that people are trying to apply are rules about behaviors, and that being LGBTI isn't a behavior. It's a part of your identity. It's who you are as a person. And so it's not appropriate, in my view, to use rules about behaviors, about doing, to talk about being.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? And I definitely think that often when there is prejudice or discrimination that I've certainly experienced in some of the faith communities that I grew up in, it often does come from a place of kind of ignorance about what LGBT people's lives are actually like, and a lot of sort of inaccurate stereotypes. But I also think that sometimes people create a false division between identities and behaviors. And so there was a lot when I was growing up of people saying things, well, I don't have a problem with gay people, they should just be celibate, or there's a difference between being gay and the practice, which was a kind of funny turn of phrase. But I think you have to accept that, we were talking about human beings at the end of the day. and when we're thinking about the things that human beings need to be accepted and treated with respect and welcomed as full parts of the communities, I think suddenly you see these divisions of, oh, we'll accept you, but only if you basically disavow everything about your identity. It's not right.
And that's still, for me, the same thing. It's about using rules about behaviours to negate who I actually am. It's about saying that we're going to take this rule, probably out of context, and we're going to use it to stop you being the person that God made you to be. And so for me, absolutely, that's the same thing. Crash, I think we had quite a similar upbringing in this regard, hearing those kinds of stories about, oh, well, of course it's perfectly okay to be who you are as long as you never act on it. Well, that's not really okay to be me then, is it? If what you're saying to me is it's okay to be you as long as you hide it in a cupboard and never act on it, that, for me, that's still negating who I am.
So looking at the next question, the next half of this kind of question is that I think that the experience of being a religious LGBT person or LGBT person of faith is not just dealing with sometimes the ignorance and the prejudice that can come from within faith communities, but also sometimes, very sadly, even within LGBT communities, people might face hostility or certainly myths and ignorance about the fact that they're religious, they have a faith background or whatever. And I was wondering if you had a message about thinking about the LGBT communities you're a part of, and what would you wish that they might understand better about faith and being an LGBT person of faith? And I was wondering, maybe Gil, you'd like to go first this time?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I've definitely come across this generalization of like, how can you be LGBT and be part of the faith community? But yeah, what I would say is that it's that wanting to be part of a community again. It's I find within Judaism a ready-made community for me who have similar life experiences, who we share traditions and we share holidays, and I find that really empowering. My identity is not just my LGBT self, and it's not just my Jewish self, it's both, and I want to be part of both communities. I don't want either community to take precedence over the other. But I think my experience with this has been slightly different in terms of the way that I've grown up with very understanding parents. So I don't speak for all Jews, I guess, because I am aware of the privilege that I have in that regard.
Who wants to go next? A message to LGBT communities about what it is to be.
Yeah, I mean, I can follow on from what Gil had mentioned. So for many of us, we look for acceptance from the LGBT community, but sadly, that's not always the case. no, I'm not just a gay man. I am also a Muslim. I am also from South Asian origin. So dealing with racism, dealing with Islamophobia is quite common, even here in the UK, for many LGBTQI plus Muslims. It's to kind of say that, like what Gail had said, that, you know, we have more than one identity, some of us. I have friends who also have a disability, and trying to navigate the queer community with all these you know, identities can be difficult. I mean, I've been stopped going into places just because of the way I look. My colleagues who wear headscarves have been asked to, you know, to say that they're in the wrong place. So I think it's important that, you know, the LGBT community stands up and recognizes that there's people within the community who come with different challenges and have a space at the table, that we also need to be asked to come along and have our say, you know, and it's important. And then also to mention that, you know, not to read everything that you read in the media. I mean, you just need to look at Islamic history. You need to look at the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, you know, where that's rich in LGBTQI history. So it's important to go and do your research. And we all live in our own little bubble. Sometimes it's good to step out and listen to other stories.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. I think it is a really important challenge to address some of the discrimination that exists within LGBT communities. And when I worked at Stonewall, we had a couple of surveys which found it was really shocking when you ask LGBT people of colour, for example, or how have you had any experiences of racism sort of in communities or on the scene or whatever, and the number of people responding saying they had experienced discrimination. I think for so many people, LGBT communities can be a kind of refuge, you know, especially people who've had experiences of violence or abuse or discrimination in communities they've been a part of previously. And I think there's just something that's really unsettling about the way that those communities can be causing problems or having prejudice or abuse or discrimination against people who are coming to them looking for a place of safety and getting that in return. And I think that's a very important challenge to all the people listening or taking part in the Pride celebrations this weekend, to recognise the work that still needs to be done in our communities to root out these issues of discrimination, and especially, you know, racism, Islamophobia, and that you mentioned just then. Ruth, I don't know if you have anything to add on this topic.
Yeah, I think what Osman said is really important, and I sit in this place of immense privilege. Like Gil, I've got great parents who've really supported me. I've had a mixed bag actually of faith communities, some that have been very supportive and some that haven't. But I've landed in faith communities where I feel comfortable and where I do feel supported. And I would just want to reach out to the LGBT community and say that my being a Christian isn't internalized homophobia. Yes, there are homophobic Christians, there absolutely are, and there are transphobic Christians. I completely accept that. But that's not necessary to be a Christian. And so I'm not laboring under like internalized hatred by being a person of faith. I'm a person of faith who believes that God made me right, that I am the way that I was meant to be, and that God loves me just like this, with all my flaws, with everything about me, just like this, including my sexuality, including my gender. And so it's not, yes, those problems exist and we've got such a long way still to go, but not everybody who's a person of faith is stuck with some kind of internalized hurt or hatred from that. For some of us, actually, our faith gives us huge strength, huge courage to also be part of another community in which we're loved and supported, just like the LGBT community. That it's not only from one side that people think this is incompatible, actually, that the LGBT side can also think it's incompatible. And I would just want to reach out and say that's not the case for everybody. There are some of us for whom it's a great joy to be a person of faith, as well as a joy to be an LGBT person.
Would other people like agree with that, this idea of faith also being a really important source of strength and courage in dealing with some of the challenges.
I would agree with Ruth. I think that's played a huge part in who I am as a person. I'm not just, I come with cultural, the way I eat my food, the way I, present as a person is reflected through my values as a Muslim. I'm taught not to discriminate. I'm taught to accept people and help the poor and help the needy. So yeah, I think it's very important.
In a similar vein, I definitely agree. Having these identities forced upon you as a young age, not forced in the sense of like forced in the sense of like you are this person, you necessarily have to become more aware of like other forms of discrimination and how people will discriminate against your other identities. And yeah, it's I guess a baptism of fire, where you have to think about these things from an early age. So yeah, for sure, they interact.
And I think, like, I'm just reminded of kind of, Osman's comment as well about the importance of kind of recognizing the histories of LGBT people that exist in our faith as well, and in our, or whatever our cultural backgrounds as well. Like there's, I think, a tendency to think in really black and white ways about these kinds of issues, in which you sort of paint like these huge and really, really complex histories of religion and community, and you just say, oh, all of that's homophobic, or all of that's biphobic or transphobic, and the only way to live sort of homophobia free is if you have this very secular, like atheistic way of life. And I mean, that's fine. I fully respect people who have that kind of outlook, and that's what feels right for them personally. But I think it just ignores all of that, the richness and the complexity and the diversity that different faith traditions have when it comes to these issues. And no matter what background you're from, like no matter where you are in the world or where you are in history, wherever you look, there's always LGBT people somewhere. And they're always playing a role in communities somehow, even if it emerges in different ways. And I think you definitely find that in our faith traditions too. So the next question that I've got down is a slightly, I'm going to say it's a slightly spicy one. And I would say that in general, when I faced prejudice against like homophobic prejudice, transphobic prejudice in church situations, it's usually been less subtle, a little bit more subtle than this. But the question is, what would you say to someone who tells you that God hates us and it is a sin to be LGBT? And I don't know if any of you have ever had an experience like that, and if so, I'm very, very sorry. But yeah, what would you say to someone who says that? And Ruth, do you want to go first on this one, maybe?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to start with, we believe in a God who hates absolutely nothing that God has made. So if anyone out there has been told that God hates you, you are a unique, valuable part of God's beautiful creation, and God loves you. God made you. God could never hate you. That is not even possible. That there's just no way that that's possible. There's nothing in our faith that would possibly allow that to be the case. So that's an unchristian starting point. I've heard it said, but it's an unchristian starting point. God loves you just the way that you are. In terms of the second half, which I hear more often, which is about whether it's a sin to be an LGBT person, that's not helpful. It's one of those things that is said to try and shut a conversation down. someone who's saying that to you, they don't want to have a conversation. They don't want to talk about things. They want to drop the mic. When they've said that, they think it's the end of the conversation. That's not a person whose mind you're going to change, probably. That's a person whose mind is closed to this, and they've decided that. If you really want to strap your rocket boots on and have the argument with them, then more power to you. But you know what? You don't owe anybody that. You don't have to do that. It isn't going to change how God feels about you one tiny bit. So you don't have to have this argument with somebody who's just told you it's a sin to be who you are. I fundamentally think that's a misunderstanding of our faith. And you don't owe somebody your time and energy in responding to that if that's their starting point. If someone wants to have a conversation about what it is to be an LGBT person of faith, that's completely different. But if someone comes at you in this, I mean, I hesitate to say it, but almost attacking mode, then safety first. You don't owe somebody compromising your own safety in order for them to continue throwing these rocks at you. I think they're wrong. I might be the person who some days feels like going, nope, I'm going to strap the boots on and I'm going to have the conversation. But there will be days where I feel like I don't owe them that conversation either. It's not, I can only speak for myself, but I stand here and I tell you that for me, it is not a sin to be LGBT and a Christian. It's just not. And therefore, for me, you don't have to have this conversation with somebody who is attacking you. They don't have the right to you. You are the person who needs to look after your own self. And that's treating God's creation with respect, because you are God's creation.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. There's some very powerful messages, and is that something that other people on the panel agree with?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Again, it's a Jewish principle that we are all made in God's image, and that isn't up for discussion. That is, and that means that we are all as we were meant to be. So it can't be a sin to be yourself. But moreover, there's this Jewish principle which is called saving lives. It's pikuach nefesh. And I think that really comes to play here. It's because that's what we're talking about here. It's saving lives. People die from this sort of sentiment. It does take lives. And this Jewish principle, I think, comes above any ideas that you might have about LGBT people. If that's what you feel, then you shouldn't say it to save lives. In the same way that Ruth kind of mentioned about safety first, that is what we're talking about here. And those are my thoughts on that sort of sentiment.
And I agree with Gil as well. I'd just like to say that, if someone was to tell me God hates you, well, I would just turn around and say, well, how do you know? You're not God. If you read the holy books with hate and discrimination in your heart, you will say that God is hateful and vengeful. But if you read them with loving acceptance in your heart, then you know God is loving and compassionate.
Yeah, I think this is such a good summary of the whole thing, isn't it? And I think, yeah, some really powerful responses. And I definitely also agree with the point that Ruth made as well of, like, sadly, you're not always going to find acceptance in every faith community. And I think I have seen situations where people have tried to sort of stick out, being in a hostile community or a community that doesn't accept them, or even communities that want to kind of change them in some way, whether that's, pressuring people to go back in the closet, or conversion therapy at an extreme end. And I think hopefully the useful thing about events like today is to show that there are spaces out there that will support you in your faith, but also support you as a person and as an LGBT person. And those can be really important, just, you know, as affirming spaces and spaces that are sort of good for the soul. So we're going to be wrapping up soon, but maybe as a kind of way of closing, if any of you wanted to share, you know, any particular advice of what you might say to a religious person who's coming to terms with their identity, or looking to get more involved in spaces for LGBT people of faith, kind of what would you suggest? Maybe I was going to say, maybe I'll start with Osman. You can talk a little bit about Hidayah.
Yeah, firstly, I'd say safety first. Do not come out if it puts your life in danger. Do not come out without already having that established support network. And most importantly, you don't have to come out. That is your choice. If for whatever reason you don't need to come out, you don't need to. Being in the closet or out the closet does not make you any less LGBTQI+. This is your journey, and you should not compare yourself to others. Come out if and when you're ready. That's my advice.
Thanks very much.
I guess I was reluctant to share on this question as well, but actually hearing Osman, I just want to echo that, definitely put your safety first. Everyone's position is unique, and giving broad stroke advice is just not a good idea in this situation. So yeah, definitely carry out your own risk assessment is a very good piece of advice.
Nobody can tell you that you're going to be safe if you feel like you're not. The person best placed to judge this for you is you. So no matter if somebody goes, oh, these are lovely people, I'm sure you'll be fine. If you feel unsafe, you are the absolute best placed person to judge whether you're safe or not in that situation. You owe yourself to nobody. You owe your coming out to nobody. I couldn't have put it better than Osman just did, so I'm not going to try and repeat it. But if you feel like you're not in a place where it is safe and proper for you to come out, then you don't have to. That is not a thing that any community should be requiring of you. I think outing somebody as an LGBT person is an act of homophobic or transphobic violence against that person. I feel that strongly about it. Is to say people must be allowed to be safe. And so even if you know that somebody is LGBT, that isn't your knowledge to share. If you know that somebody else is LGBT, that is not your knowledge to share. That's their decision to make. So don't out somebody and don't feel like you're being pushed to come out. That's your call to make, and you make it when you're safe to do it. I would say that if you're thinking about coming out within a Christian context and you are local to Cardiff, if you're local to Pride Cymru, then the Gathering is a really good safe space for LGBT Christians to meet and come together. Equally, if anyone within the church in Wales wants to have a chat, then send a message to the Faith Tent. I'm more than happy to talk through options locally, or to put feelers out to my network within the church in Wales and hopefully find you somewhere safe in your local area. So this isn't a thing you have to do on your own. The queer community of faith is here to support you and to help you to be as safe as you need to be.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's really a really important way to end this discussion this afternoon. But I just wanted to say thank you once again to the Church in Wales and to the Gathering for putting on this event. But more than anything, thank you to our speakers for giving their time, for sharing their experiences, for talking about what can be quite personal issues. I hope you've all enjoyed listening, and thanks very much also to Dave, who's been interpreting for us this afternoon. With that all said and done, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. I hope that you are celebrating with pride in whatever way you can at the moment. Thank you for joining us. All right.
spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. And oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
The song we have just heard speaks of the reckless love of God, the love that God has for each one of us. It's a love that we can't earn and don't deserve, and yet still God gives us that love. One line that particularly stood out for me was, "There's no lie that God won't tear down to show us that love." One lie that LGBTQI people have been told by religious people, by churches, is that we are not loved and accepted by God. This is a lie. God tears down that lie. God is not homophobic. God is not biphobic. God is not transphobic. God loves us in all our rainbow colours. God loves us and celebrates us, who we are, our personalities, our gifts, and yes, our sexuality and our gender identity. God's love for us is overwhelming, never-ending, and maybe even reckless. So I want to say to you today, I'm sorry if you have been told that God hates you and that being LGBTQI is a sin. I'm sorry if a church has hurt you, if Christians have hated you. I apologise on behalf of the church for any pain that has been caused to you. Because we are a glorious, multicoloured rainbow community that I'm proud to be a part of. I thank God for the colours of the rainbow. The rainbow is a symbol of hope and freedom. It is in the Christian church, where it is a symbol of God's promise to God's people that God cares for us, loves us and accepts us because we are all made in the image of God. And it is a symbol of hope and freedom for the LGBTQI community, from that very first Pride in San Francisco, when the first Pride flag was born to reflect the dawn of a new gay consciousness and freedom. Now we have many colours to reflect the different aspects of our wonderful LGBTQI community. When we deny an aspect of ourselves, whether that's our sexuality or gender or our spirituality, then we are failing to live a life in full colour. When others hate us because of who we are, whether that's because of our sexuality or gender, our faith in God, or the colour of our skin, then that full colour is being taken out of our lives. So let's live a life in full colour. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't be LGBTQI and a person of faith. That is denying you your chance to live life in full colour. Find a place, a church, which is inclusive, like The Gathering, and explore what God has to say to you, because I'm sure it will be an assurance that you are loved, valued and accepted by the God of the rainbow.
Before you came into my life, everything was black and white. Now all I see is color, like a rainbow in the sky. So tell me your love will never fade, that I won't see no clouds of grey. Cause I don't want another. You bring color to my life, baby. Life was so heavy, I was giving up, no. But since you came along, I'm light as a feather. You give me something incredible, sensational, baby. When we're together, everything is better. My darling, only you can brighten up my day. You make everything change, you rearrange, so don't go away. Let me tell ya, before you came into my life, everything was black and white. Now all I see is color, like a rainbow in the sky. So tell me your love will never fade, but I won't see no clouds of gray. Cause I don't want another. You bring color to my life, baby. Now all I see is color, you bring color to my life, baby. Now all I see is color, you bring color to my life, baby.
I never thought that I would meet anybody who knows my body, how you know my body. I can't deny it, see I stick around, cause we paint the town any way that we want it, like red and yellow and pink and green. That's what I see when you're here with me. Everything is brighter cause the limit is the sky, baby, that's the way you make me feel. You know that only you can brighten up my day, yeah.
You chase all those gray clouds away. You chase the clouds away.
Help me find a brand
shores. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, and Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing how great is our God. You're the name above all names. You are worthy of all praise, and my heart will say how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our
May God bless us with a restless discomfort about easy answers, half-truths and superficial relationships, so that we may seek truth boldly and love deeply within our hearts. May God bless us with holy anger at injustice, oppression and exploitation of people, so that we may tirelessly work for justice, freedom and peace among all people. May God bless us with the gift of tears, to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, or the loss of all that they cherish, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and transform their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we really can make a difference in this world, so that we are able, with God's grace, to do what others claim cannot be done.
Thank you for watching the Faith Tent Hour on Pride Cymru's big online week. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has made this possible. Thank you to those who took part in the Faith Panel, to Bishop June and Mother Rose Hill, and all our friends in the Llandaff Diocese, and to my colleagues at the Gathering for the music and the editing. And a special thank you to everyone at Pride Cymru for taking us online this year. Happy Pride, everyone! And hopefully we'll see you in the Faith Tent next year.